The Supreme Court, they're involved in several politically charged cases involving the president. The first one involved Trump's tax returns and other financial documents. The president, he's asked the high court to overturn a lower court ruling that gave prosecutors in New York access to those coveted documents. It all stems from the hush money case involving Trump paying off women who say they had affairs with him. By the middle of December, the Supreme Court will decide whether or not they will take up the case. It's on hold till then. Then there's the case that could decide the limits on presidential power. This involves former White House counsel Don McGahn. President, he blocked McGahn from testifying before Congress, saying he's immune from the subpoena. A federal judge ruled that McGahn must appear and also admonished the White House in the process, saying, among other things, nobody is above the law. The Justice Department has appealed, and that sets up a possible showdown in the Supreme Court. And this could prove to be a test case of checks and balances and other major constitutional issues. It's also another case that is so politicized, it will tell us a lot about just how political this particular court may be willing to get. Joining me now to discuss that and more, NPR's legal affairs correspondent, Nina Totenberg. Nina, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Nice to be with you.
Well, to that end, just how conscious and concerned is Justice Roberts, both as the high court and also with his looming role, assuming the case goes before him as the presiding judge in the Senate with the impeachment trial? How concerned is he how the Supreme Court will come out on the other end of it?
Well, I don't think the two are necessarily linked. I think he's very concerned, as are other members of the court, about the reputation of the court as a non-political, non-partisan institution. Yes, it's a very conservative court. Yes, it has 2 Trump appointees now. Yes, there do appear to be 5 justices who are have a history of being deferential to presidential power, but that doesn't mean that they want the court to lose its cred, so to speak. The questions about the impeachment itself are far fuzzier because really the Senate ultimately has the power to decide what its own rules are in an impeachment proceeding, and the House has chosen to go ahead with impeachment while court proceedings may take place, but without stopping impeachment to wait for the outcome in the courts.
I know you don't necessarily buy the theory, but a former federal prosecutor put out that there may be a strategy by the Dems that when it gets, assuming as it does, to the Senate in a trial form, that there's going to be an attempt to fast-track some of these subpoenas, and Justice Roberts would be solemn in there. He'd say yes or no the admissibility, and granted the Senate could have a vote to override his decision, but that would be rife with political consequences. Could Roberts have more than just balls and strikes, but actually deciding who gets to testify, who's applicable, who doesn't have any bearing on the case, like the Bidens, for example? And in the end, would he maybe play a much more outsized role than a lot of people may suspect at this point?
You know, anything's possible, but in the past that simply has not been the case. In the Clinton impeachment, almost everything was worked out behind the scenes. Ahead of time, the Chief Justice made no important rulings. He has the parliamentarian sitting essentially on his shoulder during the process. Most of the important decisions will be made by the senators themselves. And, you know, anything's possible. We could have all hell break loose, but I think not. The Senate makes its own rules, just the way the House makes its own rules. The House is now the prosecution. They come over to the Senate, and certainly the Senate, for example, McConnell could try to drag it out for months and embarrass Democrats who have to be there every day instead of going to be on the campaign trail if you're running for president, which several of them are. Or conversely, you know, they could try to require Adam Schiff to testify. There are all kinds of cockamamie plans like this. But in reality, when push comes to shove, I tend to think that partisan but sane heads will prevail, and that most people will want to get this done sooner rather than later.
Last thing, Nina, and that is beyond impeachment, it's an important docket when they come back, the Supreme Court. And the question is, you know, historically, conservative courts, they've spoken out against activist courts. Do you think, which particular case, if there's one, if one that stands out to you that's going to give you a tell as to, with this current makeup, just how far they're going to be willing to reinterpret even settled cases?
I mean, there are lots of these cases this year. We have a big abortion case. Next week, there's going to be the first gun rights case argued in a decade. We have big religion, separation of church and state issues to that a case coming up. We have, already argued the LGBTQ employment discrimination case. There are just tons of these enormously controversial issues before the court. And I would just caution you that activism is always in the eye of the beholder. So if you're talking about one subject and the decision goes one way, let's say abortion, then conservatives say it's an activist court. If we are talking about property rights and the decision goes in another way, then you have liberals saying the court is an activist court. Or if the court were to start going in a very different direction on abortion, we would see liberals now saying the conservative court is an activist court. So activism is a fraught word. You feel it, it's like an empty vessel. You fill it as you will.
Well, we shall see. Nina, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone, when we come back, we switch gears. The climate crisis, it could be even worse than we thought, and that's saying something. After the break, we're going to show you the devastation we're seeing financially on top of the human cost.